Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Keep the Line Moving, the podcast designed to talk about leadership, life, and inspiration. I am your host, Chris Gargano. Today's topic is the essence of being well-rounded, combining skill, intellect, as well as emotional intelligence. And our guest today, Sandy Khaund, is an individual that I've known for many years, and we have talked business and leadership over the course of those years. Here is his background. 25 years of experience across software development, product marketing, business development, and strategy consulting. He's held managerial and executive positions at 5 Fortune 500 companies, including Intel, Microsoft, and Warner Media. He has also started a company where he is right now. It's called Credenza. He started it back in November of 2021. This company empowers sports teams and athletes to seamlessly integrate Web3 technologies. We talk about all of this, plus Sandy's background, and it begins with his education. That's where we'll start this conversation on Keep the Line Moving. All right, Sandy, this is a pleasure to have you on this show. You and I have talked for many years about a variety of different topics, what it's like to be an entrepreneur, leadership, emotional intelligence, all these wonderful topics. Now we get to share it with everybody. But when I ask you, what is your career path? I have to even chuckle a little bit because you've done so much. Where are you now as you try to, as Steve Jobs always said, try to connect the dots?
Mm-hmm. It's funny to even look back at my career because now I'm in my early 50s, so I've had a good nearly 30 years of professional experience, and I've worked at a lot of big companies. I worked at Lockheed Martin building satellites, right? I was a rocket scientist. Didn't impress girls, but I was a rocket scientist for a short time. I worked at Intel building chipsets and then optimizing software. I worked at Microsoft in the developer business, building enterprise software. I've worked at Time Warner and Turner Broadcasting on TV. I've worked at all these big companies, even though I don't consider myself a big company guy, but I loved all those products because they had such a huge impact. And each one of those jobs pushed me in a direction that I had never really felt comfortable with. But every one of those things taught me, put me in really interesting situations. But as much as I did the big companies, I also have another set of experiences in smaller companies that are anywhere from 10 to 30 people. I was the COO of a social networking startup called Pixo. It was a Series D startup, had about 40 people. And I learned and I challenged myself and I was scared every minute I was there. And that was exhilarating. I was the CTO of a company called In Stadium. In fact, that's where we met. And that was fun because it was a fun challenge. And ultimately, for me, the greatest challenge is starting companies. And technically, my first company started when I was 8 years old. I don't necessarily count that. I don't put that on my resume, but I did write video games as an 8 and 9-year-old, basically after I got my Commodore VIC-20, and that's where the love was born. So I started a company after undergrad and before business school. My second one, which was in ed tech, was great. It was a lot of fun. I thought I was saving the world. And ultimately, and sort of what I think I'm most known for now, if there's a thing I'm mostly known for, is that I started a blockchain ticketing company in 2015. And so this is before that huge run up of cryptocurrencies in 2017. I wouldn't say I was the first guy in blockchain, but I was pretty early compared to a lot of the rest of the world. And I saw the opportunity, particularly as it related to Ethereum and smart contracts, that, hey, what if we took an event ticket and put it on the blockchain? And that became a company that originally was called BlockTix. And people were so afraid of the blockchain at the time that we had to change the name to Upgraded. So we became Upgraded, and 3 years later, we sold to Ticketmaster and Live Nation. So I spent a couple of years there, but I am an entrepreneur at heart. I love starting and building companies. And about a year and a half ago, I started another blockchain company, Web3, as they like to call it nowadays, called Credenza, which is taking Web3 and applying it to ticketing, sponsorship, concession, merchandise, content, all the things where sports really make money instead of digital collectibles or side things that are little tchotchkes. We're thinking really about the core of sports business and how do we impact it? How do we change the way fans and teams and rights holders interact? And that's kind of my career in as tight a nutshell as I can fit 30 years in.
So you said you went back to school during. Why don't you tell everybody just quickly your educational background, because it's impressive. And I think it's a major part of what you just said, which has led to your success. But tell everybody about your education because it's plentiful.
So high school, I grew up in New Jersey. I went to Lawrenceville School, which was a prep school in New Jersey, and I enjoyed sort of that non-technical stuff. But if you saw my SAT scores and the split between my math and verbal, my parents certainly did. They're like, no, 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 you got to be an engineer. So I was a physics major getting a liberal arts degree from Ithaca College. I was an engineering major getting a bachelor's in electrical engineering from Cornell. Did that over 5 years, and it was great because I got to exercise both sides of my brain. After I graduated, I was like, I think I still want to stick around because the economy is also kind of tough, and I still didn't feel like I'd finished my Cornell experience. And of course, I'm a big fan, which I leave my pennant up there behind me. But I actually did a master's, and it was a master's towards an idea of doing a PhD. My father was Dr. Khaund. My brother was Dr. Khaund. They explained to me that there were no Mr. Khaunds, that I had to go do a PhD. After an extra year of grad school, I'm like, I'm done. I cannot do another 4 or 5 years for a PhD. So I had actually left and gone out to the working force, and I was an engineer. That was when I was at Lockheed and Intel, and then started my first company. And as I joked, when I failed at that first company, I knew I wanted to go back to business school. And just before I turned 28, I ended up going back to business school. I went to Wharton, the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. Great 2 years, was a lot of fun. I even spent the summer in between being a management consultant, but that only reminded me, as much as I enjoyed that experience, that my heart was in tech. That combination of I can go deep into the technology, but I also can come up to sort of that, the EQ, the emotional quotient, the understanding what it means to be a leader, understanding bigger pictures, not only on what you build on a product and what do people like, but the people that are building the product. And for me, that was the great opportunity. It's like tech needs that, because that's been a little bit of a problem, because the people who write the best code aren't necessarily the ones that should be managers. And I felt like I straddled that line in a nice way. And that's, again, going back to my career, what I feel like I've done well is kind of had one foot pretty entrenched in being a tech guy, but the other one in being a leader and understanding the broader implications of everything that the tech is, both from who uses it and actually who creates it.
And that's a great point there. Who uses it and who creates it, because there's an emotional connection. That was what Apple prided themselves on, right? That connection to the product. At what point of your life did you realize, yes, I love tech and I have a magnet that's drawing me to tech, but I also have to be emotionally intelligent and understand how to motivate people, understand how to have a conversation with someone who does not know tech, but contributes to the tech world?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think when I was when I went from Lockheed, and I only spent 6 months at Lockheed Martin, right? They basically shut down the plant after I started, and they were going to move to California. And I said, I'm never ever moving to California. Funny story, I lived in California for the last 16 years. But when I went to Intel, one of the things that was really excited about Intel is that they did want to grow me. They gave me recent college graduates to manage, and I enjoyed being manager. I enjoyed mentoring these young people. I still stay connected to a couple of the people that I managed back. Now it's over 20, 25 years ago. But I also was very aware that I didn't know what I was doing. When I left Intel to start my startup, and right before I went to business school, I made every mistake known to man. I did it with 3 other people, and they were all really good people. And in retrospect, I feel bad about the way some of those relationships played out, but I also am frustrated with them. When I went to business school, what was interesting, we had a class called Managing People Work, which, when you name a class Managing People Work, it sounds like after financial accounting and financial analysis and like these hardcore, macroeconomics. Managing People Work. And it's like, oh, this, right? And here I am, snot-nosed 28-year-old kid or whatever. And I sat in the class and I had bruises practically from that amount of times I hit myself on the head going, oh my God, yeah, what was I thinking? How on earth did I think that that was going to work? Why did I treat that person like that? Or why did I say that sentence at that time? And it taught me to be a little bit more introspective. It taught me to think very much like, how am I being received on the other side? Right? I have kids, and I'm constantly like, you don't know what you don't know, but you're going to get experiences. And when you get those experiences, it's going to change what you say and when you decide to say it, and in what context you sort of do it. But I walked out of that class practically every day thinking, like, applying those things. And this is why I recommend MBAs to a lot of people, especially if it's from the right school, is that it's a great time, if you wait after a few years, to basically, like a Monday morning quarterback, right? You've had your time in the NFL. What do they do every Monday? They roll out the game film and the quarterback has to sit there sheepishly. It's like, yeah, why did I throw to that? The guy was open in the flat, or what was I thinking on that ball, right? Like, it was the opportunity to do that. And when I went back the next time when I became a manager again, it completely changed the way I was a manager. And that was really, really powerful.
So you have different phases, right? You have of your career where you're analyzing that, right? You had the phase prior to going to business school where you said, you examined in business school the mistakes you had made in starting a company and how you dealt with people. Then you just explained it at Microsoft, and as part of your corporate life, how you came across and that evaluation later in life, right? Now you're, let's call it sophisticated, right? You're in a phase of life where you've processed all of the self-awareness. You're still evaluating how you're saying things. That self-awareness and that introspection should probably, I'm making a statement here, in my opinion, that evaluation should never go away. So, Sandy, you're combining all of this experience and starting another company.
Yes.
How prepared were you to do so?
It's such a great question because I think, we're, as human beings, we're always, works in progress, right? Like, this is technically my fourth full company. I'd even say my fifth because there was an interstitial one that was there. I think I get better with each round. And I can very, very much tell you the difference between that first company and that second company. It was night and day. And even the second company and the third company, that maturity, that recognition of like, what are we here for? What's important? How do you prioritize things? How do you understand who's on the other side of that, of that conversation? And here's the thing, Chris, I still make mistakes and I'm still very aware of them and I think about it. And I still Monday morning quarterback myself on this fifth business in my early 50s. And a perfect example is I have one colleague who I love very much, but there are times when I will be very blunt about the feedback I give because that's kind of my style. And that's what people have started to notice. And even people who ask me for feedback on business plans, random entrepreneurs, I'm like, are you ready for this? So I'm going to give it to you. And I'm going to give it to you so harsh that if you decide not to do your business, I'll feel horrible. But I also want to make sure you hear every objection because that's how you're going to be better. And I have to prepare people for it. We have about 12 people at Credenza right now. None of them are the same. It is so crazy. Like, none of us live very close to one another except the dev team's a little bit close to one another, and even then pretty far away. But we're all in very different parts of our lives. We've had very different experiences. And every time I have a conversation with someone, I kind of lock in and I think like, all right, this is my designer from Ottawa, who I'm just the biggest fan of, right? But he's very different than my the chief strategy officer, chief marketing officer that lives in Bordeaux, right? They've just had very different experiences. They're probably in the neighborhood of the same age, but they take feedback differently. Like, one of them is like, admits that it's like, okay, I'm a little nervous about feedback. The other one's kind of like, yeah, hit me again. Thank you, sir. May I have another? And I'm like, all right, I got to put the setting on the brain. It's on me to adapt to them. It's not on them to adapt to me. It's on them to adapt to the goals I set and the objectives I set for the business. But when it comes to making them, to use Ted Lasso, a little belief here, making them the best versions of themselves, right? How do I do that? I have to recognize that I have to adapt. I didn't adapt early in my career. It was like, I'm the smartest guy in the room. It's my way or the highway. Deal with it. I'm the boss, right? I'm CEO bitch or whatever, like all that stuff. It's like, no, no, no. The people who talk like that and say that, I just don't buy into it. I just don't think those are good leaders.
Sandy, this is so valuable what you're saying right now. Here's why. I was giving a workshop last week, and one of the people that was contributing a lot in the workshop, it was very interactive, and the gentleman said, I treat everybody the same. And he went on to talk more about his philosophy of leadership. And I said, hold on a second. I don't think you mean that. And everybody, stood up. Whoa, man, the facilitator here, the coach here, he's what's he going to say next? And my point was, and I challenged him, and I was glad I did because I was right. I said, I know what you're saying, but I'm going to have you explain it. Everyone is different, and everyone wants to be treated how they want to be treated. And I think you're saying that, but what you're saying is you have a standard. You have a standard by which everyone knows that they have to work. You have to do your very best. You have to communicate well, whatever that standard is for Credenza now, and whatever the standard was for the company that I was doing the work for. And he said, you're right. What I meant was that, right? Because what you're saying, everyone takes information differently. So I know you do a lot of mentoring. How do you approach that part of your professional, and that's a personal thing as well, when you have, because you're mentoring people that are 55 all the way down to 22, if not younger. How do you go into, because those are crucial conversations,
Yes.
because you're guiding someone in usually, traditionally, in the early phases of their development. How do you approach that?
Yes. For me, a lot of it is the first time I meet someone, if it's an introduction, maybe I have a little bit of context around them. But we're both football fans here, right? Like back in the day, was it Bill Walsh or like there was the 10 scripted plays. It was literally like, let's see what the defense gives us, and then we'll kind of like adapt, right? So for me, I usually ask a couple of very early questions. Why are you doing what you're doing? Right. Like, and I always quote Phil Knight, right, in Shoe Dog. And it's like, don't find a job, find a calling, and understanding the calling and then anchoring on that calling and saying, okay, and this is an exercise I do with everybody that's young. And I've actually been doing it with some older people as well. But it's like, because, it really works in every stage, including for me right now, is that when I was at Microsoft, one of the best boss I've ever had. I still Mike Crop, if you're out there, I love you, man. Like this is 22 years ago, right? He sat me down. First time I was sitting with him, I reported to a guy, reported to the guy, reported to him. I was 3 rungs down from him. Eventually, I would get to report directly to him. But that first day, he took me this, wet behind the ears MBA, and he wrote 3 boxes on a piece of paper. And he put the picture, and he put a thing in the first box. He says, PDM. I was a product manager. He's like, this is where you are today. He's like, and he looked at the third box and he said, where do you want to be in 5 years? And again, I don't want to be too pushy as a Wharton MBA coming in or whatever, but obviously I have delusions of grandeur. I'm like, what do I say? And then he looks at me, he's like, do you want my job? And like, I didn't want to like be like, oh, I'm the guy gunning for your job. I kind of got a little nervous. He's like, no, no, no. I don't expect to be in my job in 5 years. It could be you, right? Why not, right? Do you want my job? And I'm like, yeah, he was a general manager. It was kind of a big deal. It's cool. So we put GM. And then he's like, why can't you have my job today? And of course, cracked a smile like, oh, yeah, I can do your job today. And he's like, don't be a wise ass. And I'm like, all right. And he started listing all these objections, all these things that I needed to work on. He said, if this is your target of where you want to go, so we've decided that this is it. This isn't me telling you should go be a GM. This isn't me telling you should go be the next CEO. This isn't me telling you should leave and go join this company down in Mountain View called Google. No, no, no. He's basically like, let's talk about what you want. Let's talk about what motivates you. Let's talk about that goal, that even if it's an interim piece of gold or that, pot of gold, that you would wake up in the morning and say, I'm ready to go to work. I'm ready to do it. And when I do it, my rewards will be this job, or more, my rewards will be this opportunity. And having that sort of way of thinking about like, how do I develop myself in a way that gets to that point, gets to that third box? That was great because basically suddenly my next 3 years of Microsoft were 5 years, but even 3 years, because we course correct as time goes on and we change what that box is. As a leader, he was great because he did 2 things in one fell swoop, right? He helped me and gave me a mentoring plan. He also, as a leader, he learned a little bit more about me. I think about those 3 boxes with everybody I mentor formally. I think about those 3 boxes with everybody I have as employees. That constant understanding of who you're talking to, and with mentorship, it's a slightly once removed thing. It's like there's nothing out of it for me in the mentorship, right? Like other than I get a satisfaction when really good people do good things. But I love seeing like, yeah, this is it, what is it you really want, right? Is it money? Is it fame? Do you want security? Do you want riches? Do you want a job that you love? Do you want people you want to be around? Do you want to have is family the most important thing to you? And there is nothing wrong with that. In fact, I would still argue family is the most important thing to me, but just in a way that works very well with a business where I can still be very aggressive.
Great story. Great giving credit to that boss at Microsoft, because that was valuable wisdom that he imparted on you with the 3 boxes. And I hope people that are listening can do the same when they're in a mentoring or leadership situation, or both. Let me ask you this. So in mentoring and or leadership, when you've looked at somebody in the eyes, either someone who's reported to you or a peer of yours, someone you've hired or someone you're mentoring, and they don't know their why, and this has come up on this podcast before, how do you help somebody find their why? Of the people you mentor, all those cohorts that I referenced, how many clearly know their why?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know what's funny is that the people that are positive, they know what their why is, are scarier to me than the people that don't, because I'm like, especially when you're younger. I mean, when you're a little bit on maybe the second half of your career, you're as a body of work, you're probably a little bit more certain because you've seen a lot. But at the beginning, it's like, and I remember certain people. I remember meeting this young woman from University of California, Berkeley, which is really close, and she was a classmate of one of my interns, and I was helping them with a project. And she had had her next 10 years plotted out from when she was going to graduate the following year until basically her early 30s. And she's like, I'm going to go here. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get this promotion. I'm going to get this. I'm going to go to business school. I'm going to come out. I'm going to work at this company. I'm going to get married. I'm going to have a kid. I'm going to do this. And I'm like, oh my God, you're not even out of college yet. Do you realize, there's what is it, the John Lennon saying, like, life is the stuff that happens when you're busy making plans, right? Like, there's so many things that change your assumptions that I like people who have a little bit of the wiggle room that says, this is, and it's almost like it's less about, I want to do this thing. And it's like, when have you been in your best, right? And there's the concept of flow, right? When are you feeling like you're in your groove, when you're doing stuff. You and I like talked about leadership, and that's why. And when I saw you do this, I was so excited because I'm like, this is you in your flow. When you're talking about leadership, when you're talking about the philosophy of making teams better, of making people better, right? Like, you are in your flow right now, and this was your why. And it always kind of made sense, even if it manifested in different ways before you actually, started sort of this part of your career. And I love that. And I think but you didn't even know how it was necessarily going to manifest. And you're still, figuring, like we're all, it works in progress. You're still figuring out, but this is the direction you want to go, because when you are working on this kind of stuff, that's when you're at your best. When you're young, you don't necessarily know. I have a 30-year body of work to say, this is what I love about corporate. Hey, it's a consistent paycheck. Isn't that kind of nice? This is what I don't love. Bureaucracy and org charts and all the other things that come with the trappings of big corporate life. When you're 21, when you're 22, Donald Rumsfeld, right? The unknown unknowns. You don't know what you don't know. You don't the things you've made assumptions on, but you've never seen in real life. You need to see. And I'll refer to my eldest again. They graduated from high school in early June, and about a year or two ahead of time before they graduated, we were pretty confident, like, you're taking a gap year. And they were a little bit younger because they're an October birth, so that helps a little bit because they were already kind of the youngest person in their class. But I was like, two things that I really wanted from them in the gap year. Number one, you need to learn to live a life without grades, because being obsessed with grades is a little bit of a challenge. That's not how the real life works. But I'm like, for 1 year, what would you do if you could do anything? Like, what if you were just free? It wasn't because a teacher told you, or your mother or father told you to, or some administration told you to. Like, what would you work on? And it's got to be more than one thing, because you're still trying to figure things out. And what I love what they've done with their gap years, that they are, they're helping publish a zine for queer youth, right? Which is an important, like, the LGBT sort of causes are very important for them. They identify as queer. They're doing that, but it's also around poetry, and they love art, so they've been taking care of that. They're going to spend 6 weeks in Japan because they've been really excited about Japanese culture, and they're learning that about themselves. That exploration, as a father, I feel like I'm doing the best thing on behalf of my child by giving them that latitude to grow, to find out who they are, to discover. With mentors, when I'm mentoring somebody, I encourage them to find the ways to do the same. I always try to do it as a leader and as a manager, but even as a mentor, I'm like, try different things, find ways. Don't get too comfortable on anything, right? If you're comfortable, you're not learning, you're not growing. And I've always said, put a premium on learning, growing, and experience in those first 10 years, right? The money will come. I know it's hard to believe, and I don't want to be trite about the idea of, like, experience doesn't necessarily put food on the table. It's like, but you don't need a lot of food, right? You probably don't have a family yet, don't have a lot of financial obligations. Learn about yourself, discover, find ways to explore new avenues that you never thought, if only to dismiss it. There's a woman that I mentor who I love. It's part of the Women in Sports Tech program, and she and I were catching up. I was her mentor 2 summers ago, and this past summer, I encouraged her to take a job, and I was like, hey, you know what, and go out to this different region, try different things. And she came back and she said, like, I'm kind of proud of her. She's like, you were in my head a lot of times. Just try something different, try something new. and it's helping her triangulate what she does once she's graduated. This is a very bright woman. She's capable of doing a lot of things. She has this sort of eclectic computer science plus art history sort of background. I absolutely love the fact that she's like, I tried this. You know what? I think I may want to be in the Northeast, so that's a premium because I love my family and I miss my family. It'd be hard to be away. And I like this part of this job and this part of this job. And I'm like, yep, just learn, explore. I dated women before I married my wife. My wife dated men before she married me. We started to discover more and more about who we wanted to spend the rest of our life with. And yeah, 22 years in, I think we both feel pretty good about the choice we made. But it would have been harder to make that choice if we didn't make the mistakes or try, sort of meeting people and spending time with people and discovering, what's important to me. This is important. What I thought was important wasn't important. And that, I always thought I want to marry a sports fan. She's like, I want to marry someone who goes camping. My wife doesn't like sports. I don't like camping. 22 years, we're still killing it, right? That's because we learned at times, like, yeah, you know what? You learn that that's not as important. What's more important is values, and what's more important is understanding what you want to having kids and keeping each other smiling during the tough times and all the other things that have made my marriage so great, made me so fortunate to find my wife.
Love it. All right, it's that time, Sandy. This visit progresses into the all-star moments. Are you ready?
All right, let's do it.
These are rapid fire. I'm going to ask you 7 questions. Some people get 6, some people get a 7th. Just depends on the conversation. So it's first thought, best thought. Don't think, just answer. Are you ready?
Okay.
Quick responses. Here we go. How do you deal with adversity?
I take a deep breath. I recognize that nothing is insurmountable, and I just kind of line things up, scribble a few things down, and I go after it. But I patiently, it's hack the clock, right? Take your time, think about it, and then go after it. Don't react quickly.
2, how do you give yourself fuel?
I used to go running, but I've injured my hip quite a bit. I spend time with the kids. I watch some of my guilty pleasures on Netflix, or I will just go for a walk sometimes, as simple as that.
3, what does never give up mean to you?
Constantly doing everything, leaving it out on the field, basically making sure that you have no regrets at the end of the day, right? Like, so sometimes you may eventually have to give up, but it can't be without a fight. So basically, until the last dying breath of the company, of the situation, of the opportunity, keep going after it.
Boom. 4, what is the value of collaboration?
Diverse perspectives, understanding that you don't have all the answers, or your answers may not be perfect, but basically, much like a piece of marble that becomes an amazing statue, the idea of having other people come in that bring their respective strengths and their respective viewpoints creates a much better product at the end of the day, creates a much better idea set at the end of the day.
5, hiring people. What do you look for in an ideal candidate?
I steal this from my good friends at Microsoft, but intellectual horsepower and, in this case, passion for the product or passion for technology. You want smart people. You want people who have the ability to handle things, that be able to aren't going to have a problem if the curveball's thrown at them. But the passion, and we used to say passion for technology at Microsoft, but it's basically like you're so enthusiastic about it that when those hard questions come, you're actually excited to apply that intellectual horsepower. Intellectual horsepower without the passion for technology just basically gets bored really quickly. Passion for technology without intellectual horsepower just means you're going to do a really poor job and put out poor work. When you have both of them, magic can happen.
6, describe yourself as a leader in 1 sentence.
Mindful, empathetic, but hard driving at the same time.
I'm going to give you the 7th one. What is the difference between a manager and a leader?
um, a manager makes sure you do the right things. A leader makes sure you do things right. I've heard that once. That's a stolen one, so I'll have to put a little TM, all rights reserved. But I think that's how I think about those things. A manager makes sure, okay, we doing the right things, is everything lined up. A leader's like, this is how we do it, sets the example, and basically says, this is how this company is going to be run. This is how this group's going to be run.
Nicely done. Sandy, this entire conversation, it brought value to the listeners. Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. I always love talking to you, Chris.
And we thank Sandy very much for being on the show. My number one takeaway is this. You heard what Sandy said about the advantage as a leader to adapt. Adapt to the people you are leading. Get to know them. How do they take feedback? What is their course of action in a given project? Or where do they want to go in totality with their career? It's up to the leader to understand that and treat everyone how they want to be treated. And Sandy said earlier in his career, he thought if he were the smartest person in the room, everything would work fine. He would tell everybody what to do, but then he soon realized, course corrected, and now he's adapting to his people. And he said it was on him to do that adapting, not on the people to adapt to him. I really enjoyed that conversation. I hope you did as well. And you got value out of it from somebody who has started companies and was at the C-suite in many others. I am Chris Gargano. Have a great week, everybody. Thank you for being part of this, and we'll see you next time. Every week, you hear guests on this podcast talk about some of their biggest leadership challenges. As a leader, you want to make an impact on those you lead and reach your organization's goals, while also optimizing your time management. Wherever you are in your leadership journey, we could all use some help. This is what we focus on with our group and individual coaching services. To book a call or get more information, email me directly at chrisg@garganoleadership.com or visit our website at garganoleadership.com. For our podcast and video producer, Jack Radutsky, and our marketing coordinator, Savin Narwal, have a great week, everybody.